There was a child who tried everything. They got good grades, but it was never quite good enough. They cleaned their room, stayed quiet, caused no trouble, but somehow there was always something more they should have done. They brought home a 90 on a test and heard why wasn't it 100. They ran as fast as they could and were told to run faster. That child grew up, they became an adult, and on the outside they look completely fine. But on the inside they are still running, still trying to be enough. Still waiting, sometimes without even knowing it, for someone to finally tell them that they made it. That they are enough, that they can stop now. Today we are going inside the psychology of the child who was never enough. Not to assign blame, not to reopen wounds, but to understand, because understanding is where healing begins. Welcome to Easy Mind, where we explore the hidden psychology behind the way people think, feel, and behave. If you have ever achieved something significant and felt nothing, no pride, no satisfaction, just a quiet emptiness followed by the thought of what comes next, this video is for you. If you have spent your whole life working harder than everyone around you and still feel like you are somehow behind, stay with me. Because what you are about to hear might be the most important thing you have listened to in a long time. Let's go back to the beginning. Every child comes into the world with one fundamental psychological need above all others. Not food, not shelter, not even safety, though those matter deeply. The most fundamental psychological need of a child is this: to feel that they are loved not for what they do, but for who they are. When that need is met consistently, when a child is seen, accepted, and valued simply for existing, they develop what psychologists call a secure sense of self. They grow up with an internal foundation that says, I am worthy, I belong, I am enough. But when that need is not met, when love becomes conditional, when approval must be earned, when affection is tied to performance, something very different happens. The child learns a lesson that will follow them for decades: I am not enough as I am. I must do more, be more, achieve more, and maybe then, maybe I will finally deserve to be loved. Psychologists call this conditional positive regard, a term first developed by humanistic psychologist Carl Rogers. It describes an environment where a child only receives warmth, approval, or affection when they meet a certain standard. When they succeed, they are praised. When they fall short, they are criticized, withdrawn from, or made to feel ashamed. And the child, because children are wired for survival above all else, adapts. They become who they need to be to get the love they need. They become the achiever, the perfectionist, the one who never stops trying. And here is the cruelest part of all. The strategy works just well enough to keep them trapped. They get the grades. They get the praise, they feel for just a moment like they are enough. And then the moment passes, the bar moves, and they are running again. Now let's talk about what this does to a person over time. Psychologists who study what happens to children raised in environments of conditional love have identified a cluster of traits that tend to appear again and again in adulthood. And if you were that child, you may recognize yourself in more than one of them. The first is chronic achievement without satisfaction. People who grew up never being enough often become high achievers as adults. They work harder than almost anyone around them. They set ambitious goals. They push through obstacles that would stop others in their tracks. Read me. But here is the painful paradox: no matter what they achieve, it never feels like enough. The promotion comes, and instead of celebrating, they are already focused on the next one. The compliment lands, and they immediately discount it, searching for the criticism they are sure is hiding somewhere inside it. The finish line keeps moving, not because the world keeps moving it, but because their internal standard was never based on achievement in the first place. It was based on worthiness, and no external achievement can fill an internal wound. The second trait is perfectionism rooted in fear. Most people think of perfectionism as a positive quality: attention to detail, high standards, dedication to excellence. And sometimes it is, but the perfectionism that grows out of never being enough is something different. It is not driven by a love of excellence, it is driven by a terror of failure. Because for the child who was never enough, failure was never just a mistake. It was evidence, evidence that the fear was true, that they really were not good enough, that the love really was conditional, that they really did not deserve to be here. So they avoid failure at almost any cost. They procrastinate on things that matter most, because not trying feels safer than trying and failing. They overprepare, overexplain, overapologize. They hold themselves to standards they would never dream of applying to anyone else. Research from the University of British Columbia found that this type of perfectionism, what psychologists call socially prescribed perfectionism, the feeling that others expect you to be perfect, is strongly associated with anxiety, depression, burnout, and a chronic inability to feel satisfied with one's own accomplishments. The third trait is difficulty receiving love. This one surprises people. You would think that someone who spent their childhood starving for love and approval would be desperate to receive it as an adult. And in some ways they are, but something strange happens when love actually arrives. They do not trust it. When someone compliments them, they wonder what that person really wants. When someone loves them consistently and unconditionally, they wait for the moment it will be taken away. When things are going well in a relationship, some part of them is already bracing for the disappointment that must surely be coming. Because their nervous system was trained in an environment where love was unpredictable, where it appeared then disappeared, where they could never fully relax into it because it always had conditions attached. So when unconditional love finally shows up, the kind they always wanted, it does not feel safe. It feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar to a nervous system shaped by early experience feels dangerous. Psychologists call this earned insecurity. It is one of the most isolating experiences a person can have to desperately want connection, but to be unable to fully receive it when it arrives. The fourth trait is an inner critic that never sleeps. Most people have an internal voice that comments on their performance, their decisions, their worth. For most people, that voice is manageable. But for the child who was never enough, that voice became the loudest thing in the room. It sounds like the critical parent. It uses the same words, the same tone, the same impossible standards. And it follows them everywhere, into their work, their relationships, their quiet moments, their dreams. Neuroscience has given us a window into why this happens. Early childhood experiences, especially emotionally significant ones, shape the architecture of the developing brain. When a child grows up in an environment of consistent criticism, the neural pathways associated with self-criticism become deeply reinforced. They become the brain's default mode. In other words, the inner critic is not a personality flaw. It is a learned neural pattern. It was installed by experience. And what was installed by experience can, with time and the right tools, be gradually rewired. But that rewiring begins with one thing: awareness. So what does the path forward look like for the child who is never enough? It begins with a recognition that may feel almost radical the first time you truly let it in. The problem was never you. You were not too much, you were not too little. You were not fundamentally flawed or deficient or unworthy. You were a child who needed something that the adults around you were not able to give, not because you did not deserve it, but because they were operating from their own unhealed wounds, their own limitations, their own psychology that had nothing to do with your actual worth. The love you needed was never withheld because you failed to earn it. It was withheld because the person who should have given it freely did not know how. And here is what that means: no amount of achieving, proving, perfecting, or performing was ever going to get you there. Because the thing you were chasing was never actually available in that environment. You were running a race with no finish line. And the kindest thing you can do for yourself now, today, in this moment, is to stop running. Not to give up, not to stop growing or achieving or becoming, but to stop running from the fear that you are not enough. Because you were always enough, you just were not told. The work now is learning to give yourself what was not given to you then. To speak to yourself the way a genuinely loving parent would have spoken. To celebrate your wins instead of immediately moving past them. To let people love you without waiting for the conditions to appear. To fail sometimes and discover that you are still here, still whole, still worthy. It is slow work, it is not linear. There will be days when the old voice comes back louder than ever. That is not failure, that is just the brain doing what brains do, defaulting to the familiar. But every time you catch that voice, name it, and choose a different response, you are building something new. Something that was always supposed to be there. A self that knows, without needing anyone else to confirm it, that it is enough. If something in this video stirred something in you, if some part of what I described felt uncomfortably familiar, I want you to sit with that for a moment. Not to spiral, not to blame, just to notice, because noticing is the beginning. Drop a comment below and tell me, did you grow up feeling like you were never enough? I read every single comment, and you might be surprised how many people feel exactly the same way. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is let them know I see you. And you are always enough. Subscribe to Easy Mind for more videos like this every single week. And I will see you in the next one.